I spent some years in big law, and let's just say it's a bit of an odd industry, but it rakes in the cash. Here's how it all works. Now, when I say big law, I mean large law firms, and these firms typically have many hundreds, if not over 1,000 or thousands of attorneys, and are billing lots and lots of hours each year. Within a big law firm, you're typically going to have a pretty well-defined hierarchy, and at the top you'll have the partners who actually own the firm and get a share of the profits of that firm, and below them would be all of the associates, and these are lower-level attorneys who are billing lots and lots of hours on behalf of the firm, but don't necessarily get an actual profit split because that's reserved for the partners. And below associates would be all of the support staff, paralegals, legal secretaries, and all those sorts of people who really help make a law firm go round. Now that we have that all set up, here's how the big law business model works. First, you have to find some clients with deep pockets, and I'm talking very deep pockets. Then you bill associates out at $500, $600, $700 plus per hour to clients. And then you pay those associates around $100 to $150 per hour billed. And when you require your associates to bill something like 2,000 hours per year of billable hours, you're looking at well over $1 million in fees collected per associate. And that's per year. Meanwhile, associates might get 20% of that number, with a lot of starting salaries for big law associates being around $200,000 a year, which is a ton of money, don't get me wrong, but it's a pretty significant spread that the firm is making on the associate's time. And it turns into a pretty massive spread quickly when we're talking about this many hours. If associates can come even close to hitting their required hours, that's a nice chunk of profit for the firm. And that's the general business model. Now, before we get into the drawbacks of this model, let's talk about some of the benefits both for associates and for clients. For associates, even though they're only making a fraction of what they're actually billing for the firm, they're still making a lot of money, all things considered. We're talking about $200,000 plus per year, even up over $300,000, especially when you factor in bonuses, which are often paid out by firms during good years at least. But the pay is still strong, even considering the amount of value that the associate is technically bringing to the firm if they bill their hours. But another benefit for associates is the amount of experience you can get just by billing so many hours. When you're working on that many hours of stuff, you're going to be seeing lots of things, and just by nature of being involved in so many different matters over a given year, you're going to start to compound your experience a lot more quickly than you might find at a different firm. That's not always the case, and it does depend on what you're actually working on in a given team, but the amount of hours does count for something. But you've probably been wondering, what is the main benefit for clients? Well, the number one benefit that I see is just the amount of volume that a big law firm can cover, and for a large company that has a lot of legal demand or has a lot of things that need to be worked on, having that amount of capacity is something that only a large firm can really provide, unless that company tries to bring things in-house, which is challenging in itself. And many companies that have large in-house counsel teams still will hire out outside law firms, and they're typically going to be larger law firms that can handle a lot of work. So even though they're paying hand over fist to actually get this service done, it's just that there's a lot of capacity, so it's easier than having to split it up over many different law firms. It just becomes hard to organize, you get different styles on things, and just having it all in one shop is pretty convenient. And in many cases, big law firms are able to hire really high quality talent because they have so much money to throw around, and that might come through bonuses, signing bonuses, or just the base salary, whatever it is. There is a lot of money swimming around, and when you have that kind of money, you can typically hire really good talent, and when you have really good talent, you can provide a good product. So I'm not trying to say that whatever billable rate they're charging is totally worth it, but at least in some cases, I guess you could say you're getting what you're paying for. And that should be a really talented legal team. Now, if that doesn't happen, then the client is going to be very unhappy because they're paying a ton of money. And because they're paying so much money, clients will have a reasonable expectation that things are going to come back quickly and accurately, and that's pretty hard to find at scale. So those are some of the main benefits, but what about the drawbacks? Well, sticking with clients, the obvious drawback is the price tag. You're paying a ton of money for these services to get them from this specific big law firm. And because of those billable hour requirements, there is a bit of an incentive for a lot of different attorneys to put their hands on something just so they can get a couple hours out of it. Not saying that people are actively trying to abuse anything, but the incentives are kind of lined up in a way where there can be a lot of waste. You could argue that's more of a problem for law in general and not just big law, because lawyers are typically paid by the hour. So when you're paid by the hour, you're encouraged to take more hours to get that task done, and it is just a problem problem. I really think with professional services in general, it just happens to be very notable here when the hourly rate is so high. And another drawback for clients is they're typically not going to have a super personal relationship, certainly not with all the people that are working on their stuff. So they might have a good relationship with maybe one of the partners or whoever originated this client. But even then, it's typically some sort of team on the client side that's working with a team on the law firm side. So it's not as though it's a one-to-one relationship. It's usually lots of people working on things. So it's pretty rare that you're going to have super close relationships between clients and the individual attorneys on the particular matter. Though that totally depends on the client, the specific matter, the specific team, because all of that can vary. But anyways, as for associates, the drawbacks tend to be about the intensity of the job. You have a lot of hours you have to bill. You can't necessarily be that flexible with your schedule because you have those hours to bill. You have client demands to fulfill, and those clients, remember, they have a reasonable expectation to get things done fast and effectively, so you have to be able to do that. And that might mean that you're working super long hours just to get something done in a given week. And when we're talking about this happening over many years of a career, it can get very exhausting. And it might become especially exhausting, or at least very frustrating, if the avenues for growth eventually slow down, which is another potential drawback of big law. Because of that rigid hierarchy, it sometimes can be hard to advance, or the ability to advance might be a bit slower than you might want it to be because it's a rigid fixed structure and you gotta put in your time, and even if you are a super talented attorney, you might not rise as quickly as you might want. And in some cases, if you're trying to become a partner, that path to partnership might not be that obvious. But again, that's going to be a little bit different with each firm. It's not as though every firm it's impossible to advance, but for some, they might be quite a bit slower than others, and that can be frustrating. Now, like I mentioned, I did work a couple of years in big law, and it was definitely very intense while I was there, but I generally had a pretty positive experience, and I definitely learned a lot through it, but it was intense, no doubt about it. But when I look at the economics of something like big law and how that works, it does get me thinking about running my own firm, and that's something I've started very recently since I've ended my time in big law. Because when you really look at the model, you can start to make some pretty serious cash at much lower rates because you just don't have the same sort of overhead of running the firm, paying all the case assistants, all the paralegals, taking all the lavish trips, or whatever big law is notorious for. And you just have a lot more flexibility in any given direction. For example, you can set your rates, and those rates are probably going to be a lot lower than big law rates, yet you'll get to keep more of that because, again, you might be keeping $100 to $150 per hour in the big law setting, even though you're billed out at $600 plus per hour, or whatever it is, even up to $1,000 plus at some of the most lavish firms out there. But if you're running your own practice and you're billing clients out at $200, $250 an hour, that is already below half of what the big law rate would be, yet you personally would get to keep double of what you were making before, at least on an hourly basis. So now you need to bill out half the amount of hours that you were billing in big law to make the same amount of money. That's easier said than done, but it's definitely achievable. And it's very achievable when you have a solid network of people who could use help but are kind of priced out of the big law space, and you also have some experience to go along with it, at least enough to get you started to where you can kind of fill in the rest with research and hard work. But if you have that network, you have a much clearer option to run your own firm because you have the demand there. And that really applies well beyond just law. If you have a network of people that you can provide some sort of value to, some sort of skill, whether it be in the professional setting or in some other setting, you then have the option to make a business out of providing that value. So the key lesson there is to work on your network and make sure you're meeting new people, because you never know when those people are going to be the ones that you could provide value to in some way. If you want to start your own firm, if you want to start your own business, it's very important that you actually have some people off the bat that you can start helping if your setting suddenly changes. Ask me how I know. But anyways, that's a pretty high-level overview of the big law business model that has proven to be very lucrative over the years. That's definitely not the only profitable business model out there. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and thanks for watching.